Hey everybody, this is Tracy here with another edition of A View from Tracy's Point. And today I am here with part 3 of the story line that I was sharing with you guys over the weekend. First, I showed you a video of a police shooting in my hometown of St. Petersburg, Florida. And then I posted part 2, which was a press conference that was held by 2 community activists. And so I said I would come back and talk more in depth about what actually took place with this police shooting. And so I normally don't cover stories like this, but because it hit home, in my hometown, I wanted to try and tackle it, but tackle it for several different reasons. The main reason is that, we have a community now that's divided over the death of this young man because of circumstances surrounding what took place. And so one issue is the fact that, as I shared with you guys in the first video, he was shot at 50 times by police and was actually hit 38 times. And the police are not revealing the names of the police officers. And later in the video, I'll get to their, what they say took place. And then the other half is that there was a murder that took place in our city last year, and it is now being revealed that this young man who was killed by police is a key suspect in that murder. However, at the time that this police story came out about the shooting, they claimed that he was wanted for, an incident that happened at a park with a 15-year-old. And so on Tuesday, no, actually it was Wednesday, December 2nd, it was my mom's birthday. I was at my mother's house celebrating her birthday when my youngest daughter called and asked me, Mom, are you okay? There's something going on, over on 18th and 16th. And I was like, no, I haven't heard anything, but, we're good over here. And so my sister was sitting there and she said, oh, when I was picking the kids up from after school, I couldn't turn on 18th Avenue. We had the detour and there was like a large police presence there and the helicopters were up. And so I was like, okay, well, when I get home, I'll, research it and see what's going on. And of course, when I got home and brought up Facebook, people were talking about it. And then it was later revealed about this shooting that took place last year. And so I wanted to tackle this subject, not so much on the actual act of the police shooting, but kind of to tie in the fact that, we spent the entire summer being engulfed with these Black Lives Matter protests because of these, police incidents where people were killed, the George Floyd, Rayshard Brooks, and then Jacob Blake, who thankfully he survived, what happened to him. And so one of the things that I noticed, when trying to have conversations with people about police shootings is that nobody wants to look at the full picture. They want to look at the moment that the police officer killed the person, but they don't want to talk about what led up to it and, how we can better govern ourselves and, how do we deal with, how do we help people in these situations when they're dealing with the police? And then how do we get police not to be so anxious, to pull the trigger when dealing with suspects? And even I did like a girls trip over the Thanksgiving weekend. And one of my friends and I were talking, and I noticed that this is like the second or third time she and I have attempted to have this conversation. And she automatically shuts down when you say, okay, well, we have to look at the overall picture. And at some point, we have to show accountability for our actions and what we're doing. And she goes into, yeah, but why do police always have to kill Black people? And I tried to explain to her, police kill everybody, regardless of race. Women are less likely to get killed by police than men. Men are, I believe, like 95, 96, 98%. of people who are killed by police, but police kill everybody. They kill white people, they kill black people, Hispanic people, Asian people, you know, Pacific Islander people. They don't care. They kill everybody. And so there seems to be a lot of people who don't realize that that is the case, that every year, you know, over 1,000 people in America are killed by police, and the vast majority of them, you know, had weapons. It doesn't mean, you know, just because you had a weapon doesn't mean that you were in the wrong, because we saw that with the Philando Castile shooting in Minneapolis, where he told the officer, I have a gun on me, I'm licensed to carry, I'm going to give you my license. And as he reached for the license, the police officer shot and killed him. So just because we see, oh, the person had a weapon, doesn't mean that they were a threat to the police officer. And then we see a lot of shootings by police where they claim that the person was trying to run them over. And I can tell you personally, I had a cousin who was murdered in Thomasville, Georgia in 2017, like August 2017, I believe it was. And the police was there to serve a warrant on him. They went to the house. He wasn't there, but then they saw him come up in a car, and then they surrounded the car, and they was telling him to get out the car. And then it was like he reached for the door handle to open the door, but the car started to roll because the car was in drive. And then the police just opened fire on him. And so he fell forward, and then his foot was on the gas, and the gas, you know, the truck, the SUV he was in took off, right? And so the police are just firing at him, and they, you know, eventually killed him. But he was not trying to run over the police. He was not shooting at the police. But, you know, there's a saying that says that who controls the media controls the narrative, you know, so the police control the media when it comes to these shootings, so they get to control the narrative, and they get their narrative out, and the person that they shoot and kill never gets to tell their story because they're gone, right? And so it was like a story that I was reading from Ohio that happened on Friday night, where this 23-year-old black guy was killed by the SWAT team in Columbus, Ohio. And so in this case, the police admit, the U.S. Marshal's office admits that the SWAT team was in the area because they were searching for a fugitive. And I guess they had, you know, intel that this person was in the area. So they were searching for this person. And then they claimed that this young man, his name is Casey Gooden Jr., that he drove by and waved a gun, like, why? Okay. And that the officer then told him to drop the gun, and he refused to drop the gun, and then he was shot and killed. Okay, first of all, you said he was driving past the SWAT team and waved the gun. So how did we get from him driving, waving the gun, to him entering his home and getting shot in the back 3 times by the police? So, and then the family says that he was licensed to carry, but he only had a Subway sandwich, his face mask, and his keys in his hand at the time that he was shot. And then we have no account from the police that there was a gun at the scene. The only time they talk about a gun in their account is when they say that he drove past the officer and waved the gun, which makes no sense, okay? And so in St. Pete, we had an incident back in 1996 where this young man named Tyron Lewis was killed by police in a similar fashion as the Dominique Harris guy. And that led to, they called it riots. I didn't call it riots. I said it was really civil disturbances, because I'm going to be honest with you, I slept through the whole thing, just like I kind of missed this whole shooting that took place. And I just remember waking up that morning and turning on the news as I was getting ready for work, and they were showing buildings had burned down. And I guess when you're looking at the definition, it probably was a riot, because St. Petersburg is not a really big city. And so I was looking up our demographics. So our city is small. Like, we're part of the Tampa Bay area, which is a larger metropolitan area, but St. Pete really is not big. We have like 200. This website that I brought up, I don't think is really accurate in their numbers. It's saying 272,000 people live in St. Pete. I believe it's more like 280 some thousand, but the Black population is around 60,000. They're saying 58,000 for 2020, but I believe it's more like 61, 62,000. But I do know that we are losing part of our Black population because of gentrification in the area. And St. Pete is a city, you know, I was wondering if they were going to have any kind of protests or rallies around the shooting of this young man. And I'm not surprised that they didn't do it, which was really the delay in me doing this video, because I wanted to see what the community reaction was going to be. And so there hasn't been a big reaction, mainly because the community as a whole is like the socioeconomics of the Black population in St. Petersburg is not that great. And there isn't a lot of wealth among Black people in St. Petersburg. However, you have a lot of elitists in St. Petersburg, you know, who pretty much think that they control the Black community. And that's part of what the issue is that you have 100 Black churches in this little small area called Midtown. And you know, we know what churches do, right? They prey on the community. They take from the community. And then when things happen, they're not really in the mix that much. And so I wasn't really expecting a great, you know, turnout. I wasn't expecting a lot of protests. And it goes to what I noticed about the Black Lives Matter movement is that we were inundated, you know, over the summer leading up to this presidential election with Black Lives Matter protests, civil unrest, people getting arrested, people getting beaten, businesses being vandalized. All summer long, we dealt with this. And then when we get to the election, the country goes quiet, right? Nobody's protesting, nobody's coming out. And you would think that there haven't been any police shootings since then. But the truth of the matter is, I looked it up, there have been over 80 people that have been shot and killed by the police since election day. So you're talking about a month, like 33 days. 80 some people have been killed. And amongst those 80 plus people, and I don't have the exact number because when I was doing this the other day or yesterday, the Washington Post, which tracks this data, had not updated any of the deaths for the month of December yet. So basically from November 3rd to November 30th, 80 people have been killed by police. And we already know with the Dominique Harris, the Casey Gooden, and then I've read probably another 5 other accounts that there have been at least 5 other people that have been killed by police in the month of December, in this first week of December. And so among the African Americans, since that's what we're talking about in this video, at least 22 were Black men, at least 6 were here in the state of Florida, where I am, and then let me see. Let me go back up here. I always lose my place. You guys know if you follow me, my computer is crazy. Okay, and then at least 19 of the 22 were reported to be armed with a gun, 1 with a knife, at least 2, it didn't list whether there was a weapon involved or not. At least 3 had known mental illness. At least 18 of the shootings, the officers either had no body camera or the body camera wasn't turned on. And at least 8 of the individuals were not trying to flee the police. And at least 8 were between the ages of 18 and 25. And of those, 3 were in Florida. And then there was 1 person who was 16 years old that was killed, and he was in the state of Florida. So Florida definitely seems to have an issue, or they're keeping up with other states with issues with police violence. And so there are an estimate of people shot, like these are estimates of people shot. And as I said, that this includes people that are shot and killed by police. It doesn't include people like you have with the George Floyd, the Elijah McClain, where they died in police custody. George Floyd had the knee on his neck. Elijah McClain, they gave him this drug to because they thought he was high, and the drug ketamine was supposed to bring him down, but he really was just having a panic attack and ended up going into cardiac arrest. And so the Washington Post doesn't keep up with those deaths. And so when I look at the Black Lives Matter, and it just gets deeper for me, because I'm thinking Black Lives Matter, and these attorneys come out and they profit, make millions and millions and like tens of millions of dollars off the death of unarmed Black people that are killed by police without even dealing with the backstory, like what led up to the police interaction. But because the person is unarmed, they will, take on those cases. They'll blow them up. They will, make millions of dollars for the family, for the attorneys, and then they move on. But it doesn't seem to be a lot of work dealing with, like I said, what is going on leading up to these shootings. We know with the Rayshard Brooks, he was, jovial, dealing with the police for like 20 to 25 minutes. And then when the police said, okay, we have to arrest you and take you to jail, then he started fighting with the police. He took the taser, he fired the taser. The police officer ended up shooting him. Now, this doesn't mean that the police officer is justified in shooting him, but, these are things that have to be looked at and have to be discussed, that it seems that nobody wants to talk about. And I believe it is the same thing with people who are armed, like that have guns or have weapons that may or may not have pointed the weapons at the police officer. It's like we still have an obligation to try to understand what's going on in the communities. And I look at the Dominique Harris guy who was 20 years old, and we have all these programs in our city that's supposed to help underserved youth. And so obviously something, fell through the cracks, in this particular case. The city touts this program called Not My Son, which is a part of the Obama administration's My Brother, Sister's Keeper. And personally, I don't have a son. I don't have a daughter that's young. I probably wouldn't fall into the economic category that would even be served by this organization. And then I think I told you guys in another video on another topic how they have these programs that's supposed to help youth, but they aren't helping the youth that they are supposed to help. That they're attempting to help. And so I know that I have friends, who are married, make a good income, middle-class families, and their sons are in these programs that are actually supposed to be structured around, inner city youth, low-income youth who could fall through the cracks, who could be a Dominique Harris that end up, involved in crime and different activity. But nobody wants to look at that. They just want to say we served X amount of kids. These kids graduated from high school. These kids went on to college. But if you look deeper, then you know that those kids were going to graduate from high school and they were going to go on to college regardless of that program, just by the mere fact of who their parents are. And so it's just a lot to look at. So let's go ahead and get into what happened with this case with Dominique. Okay, so I believe that this is the second account of what transpired on that night. And this narrative is coming from the Pinellas County Sheriff. His name is Bob Gualtieri, and he is not liked amongst the Black community because of, like I said, it's all racial. As small as St. Petersburg is, it does have a lot of racial issues or racial overtones. And so this sheriff, you would think he runs the city. And so when they talk about defunding the police, I always tell people, you know, if a city police department reduces their funding for police and turn that money over to social services agencies, the only thing that's going to happen is that the county sheriff, who has jurisdiction over the county and the cities within that county, they're just going to get greater police powers. And so even though we aren't really going through a whole defunding thing, you know, they're pretending like they're going to fund these social services programs, but the money that they're actually funding those programs with was money that was intended to hire new police officers. So not a lot is changing. And so Bob, I call him Bob, okay? So Bob is giving this account of what happened, even though the shooting was with the St. Petersburg Police Department. And they recently created this initiative where when there are police shootings, they don't investigate themselves, but technically they are investigating themselves because there are St. Petersburg police officers that are on this committee that is going to investigate this shooting. So according to Gutierrez, Dominique Harris, who was killed by police after shooting an officer on Wednesday, was a person of interest in a 2019 homicide. And I had heard this or saw this on social media because one of my Facebook friends is actually the person who was killed in 2019 is his uncle. And so he was sharing some of his feelings about what transpired, how his family was treated by the community, about this young man and his, you know, how they were taunted, you know, and there was no sympathy or no outpouring of concern, you know, from the community about his nephew being killed last year. And so, you know, this was giving them a sigh of relief that, you know, they had finally, you know, this matter had been taken care of. We can put it that way. And so in the beginning, you know, people were outraged that this had happened. But then as that story started taking center stage, that's when you could see like the divide in opinions amongst the community, and the conversations kind of died down because people didn't know how to respond to the situation. And so the article goes on to say, Harris was also known to be armed and to flee from police. The sheriff said at a Thursday news conference to address the shootout, which sent one officer to the hospital and ended with the death of Harris. Authorities say the 20-year-old tried to ram a car past a blockade of officers attempting to arrest him on a child abuse charge, then fired at an officer. Police vehicles had boxed in Harris's vehicle when authorities say he aimed a semi-automatic handgun out of the driver's side window and shot an officer at close range. Other officers then opened fire on Harris in a scene captured on a video posted to Facebook. And then I'm going to post the link because that was part one of this story. And you can see that in its entirety. The sheriff said 6 St. Petersburg police officers fired a total of 50 rounds during the incident. Harris was struck 38 times. Gutierrez declined to name 5 of the officers because they were undercover. He said the 6th officer, Richard McKee, who works in patrol. And so I was interested to see if Richard McKee was black or white, because I'm thinking if you're not going to name the other 5 officers, why are you going to put his name out there so that he can catch the brunt of whatever, you know, might have come of this? So he says that Harris fired at least 4 times at the wounded officer from what the sheriff has called point-blank range. The officer was shot twice in the mid-torso area and was pulled to safety by another officer during the gun battle. He underwent surgery and was reported to be in stable condition. Now, people that were at the scene of the shooting, and there were a lot of witnesses, are saying that Harris did not shoot the police officer, that the other police officers shot this officer. So earlier in the day, St. Petersburg Police Chief Anthony Holloway, who is a black man and who didn't seem to want to come out and talk to us about what took place, because on the night of the incident, Gutierrez was doing all the press conferences, and then people were trying to say, because I was like, you know, where's our police chief? Like, do we even have one? Because he never talks. I mean, he'll come out and talk about stupid stuff, but when it comes to serious stuff, you don't really hear from him. And, you know, like in the video from the press conference, and I'll also put that link up there from the activists, you know, they were basically calling him a puppet because he is just so, you forget that we have a police chief sometimes. And so people were pointing out about this agreement that came about over the summer that I was telling you guys about, where they are not going to investigate themselves. And I said, regardless of who's investigating, as the police chief of the city where the shooting happened, and as the police chief of the officers involved and the officer that was shot, he had an obligation to come out and talk to the community after the shooting took place. Don't send Bob out there when you know people already hate this man, think he's a racist. Like, why would you let him be the spokesperson for this incident? And so he finally came out the following day, you know, almost 24 hours later, to make a statement. So earlier in the day, St. Petersburg Police Chief Anthony Holloway asked residents to stay calm and to wait for the facts to come out while a Pinellas County task force investigates the actions of the officers in Wednesday's deadly shooting. The chief and mayor, Rick Kreisman, spoke outside the city of St. Petersburg Police Department headquarters downtown. And that is a brand new headquarters that cost like millions and millions of dollars. They spent millions of dollars on artwork for the multi-million dollar new headquarters, while the city is suffering from affordable housing and people are being forced out of their homes due to gentrification. And so that's part of the tensions that are going on here. So Kreisman started by saying the progress the city has made toward improving relations between police and the community is hollow after an incident like this. It was hollow before the incident, Rick. So nobody wants to hear about progress when one person is in the hospital and another in the morgue, he said. On days like yesterday, it doesn't matter what we've accomplished, how safe St. Pete is. So police attempted to capture Harris, who was wanted on a child abuse charge, in a confrontation that unfolded outside of the Food Max grocery store on 18th Avenue South after 4 p.m. It was the third fatal shooting to take place at the store in recent months. And so now people are calling, you know, for the store to be shut down. So my thought process is the store isn't inciting violence and causing the violence. Is in the fiber of the city and the community and police relations that's causing the violence. So you can't blame it on the store, you know, because if the store shut down, that doesn't mean that people in the community aren't going to be subject to crime. You know, it's a matter of opportunity and what's going on, you know, arguments, beefs that are taking place in these neighborhoods. That's the cause of the violence, not the store. So Harris was pronounced dead at Bayfront Health, St. Petersburg Hospital Wednesday night. Holloway said the detective who was wounded is recovering at the same hospital. The officer asked that his name not be released. The child abuse incident Harris is accused and took place at a basketball court in the city, Holloway said. Harris picked up the 15-year-old victim and threw him down. The child was taken to the hospital and treated for bruised ribs, the chief said. The parents wanted to press charges. Now, you notice in this narrative, the 15-year-old is a child, okay? But had the 15-year-old committed a crime, or he would have been a grown adult, you know, there would be nothing childlike about him, because that's how they spin these scenarios. So Holloway, St. Petersburg Mayor Rick Kreisman, and Deputy Mayor Kanika Tomlin addressed the media during a press conference outside the police department regarding last night's shooting that left the 20-year-old dead and the officer wounded. Holloway reiterated Thursday that he has no say on the investigation, which is being handled by the Pinellas County Use of Deadly Force investigative task force, a new program where county law enforcement agencies band together to investigate officers' use of force. The agencies used to investigate their own officers. Holloway reminded the public Thursday that the task force is, quote, what the community asked for. And so he loves to do that, because we had an issue a few years ago, because on Martin Luther King Day, after the MLK parade, there's like a stretch of MLK Street in our city that turns into like this huge block party that residents have been complaining about for years, because they can't get in and out of their homes. The whole, like a large radius of the city is literally under siege with police, you know, trying to control what's going on MLK Street. And so a few years ago, the city decided that they were going to shut the party down before the party started. And they just blocked off all these streets. They had this huge police presence. And then that was the same statement that he made when the community showed up to say that they felt that they were under siege. You know, he was like, but this is what the community wanted. You guys said that you were, you know, you were tired of the party. You were tired of being locked into the house, couldn't leave, or either you had to leave for the day and not come back until the next day to get into your home. So we were giving you what you needed, instead of addressing the issue, you know, in a manner which involved community input. So he goes on to say the use of deadly force task force was formed so we can show that we're being very transparent and we're accountable to the citizens of St. Petersburg. The sheriff and the task force and the state's attorney's office will investigate the criminal matter involved in the shooting with Mr. Harris. So the task force is made up of 3 homicide detectives from the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office, the St. Petersburg Police Department, and the Clearwater Police Department, and 1 detective from the Pinellas Park Police Department. So doesn't that sound like they are still policing themselves? Holloway's address Thursday afternoon was the first the public had heard from the police chief since the shooting. On Wednesday night, it was Gutierrez who addressed the media. And Petersburg residents took to social media to express confusion as to why Holloway hadn't addressed the public about the shooting. Others wondered why the police narrative seemed different than the footage they saw on the viral Facebook video that captured the shooting. Some residents who live near the Food Max grocery store told a Tampa Bay Times reporter Thursday that they were shaken more by the police-involved shooting Wednesday than the previous shootings in the area. Quote, when the police are shooting at people, it's not safe no more, said Jason Allen, 32, who lives nearby. That causes people to be scared of the police. Brandon Williams, 25, said he was confused by an officer, or why an officer was standing on top of a truck shooting at the victim. That was police brutality, he said. Allen was also alarmed by the police response, given the nature of the child abuse charge. What was reason enough to bust windows, he said. Why did they shoot so much? You couldn't miss that many times. And then they go on to say that this is a developing story and that they would come back with more information. And so if you go and you look at the video that I posted of the shooting, look to the top left of the video and you will see the police officer standing on top of a vehicle shooting down at the car. I think he empties his clip at one point, they're saying, and then reloaded and then started shooting again. And you can see him like walking around trying to get a better angle as he's aiming down, firing these shots. And so whether the shooting was justified or not, I believe that he, if nobody else, needs to be disciplined, because there was no excuse for him being, you know, it was like he thought he was in like one of these video games or something. And you guys know whenever this happened, I'm like, they need to be testing these guys, finding out how much time do they spend on video games, because the way some of these people be carrying on in these shootings, it just makes no sense. And it just makes you wonder, like, what is their thought process when this is going on? And so then the second article that came out, I think it was this one. This was a follow-up article that gave more information about what took place. And this is from our Channel 10 ABC news station. And so it says, or actually Channel 10 is CBS now. So it says, the man who died after a shootout with police on Wednesday was also a person of interest in a homicide from last year. It says, back in 2019, a former Northeast High School football captain was shot and killed while riding his bike in South St. Pete. His name was Marquise Scott. He was 20 years old. Gutierrez said the St. Petersburg Police Department Major Crimes Unit had recently identified 20-year-old Dominique Harris as a possible suspect in Scott's murder, and detectives wanted to question him about the homicide. On October 27th, a 15-year-old boy was playing basketball on 27th Street South near 22nd Avenue South in St. Pete when the teen got into an argument with some other kids. Harris wasn't involved in the basketball game, but the sheriff's office said he injected himself into the argument. He picked up the 15-year-old boy and slammed him to the ground. He also began to punch him several times in the torso, and he caused injuries to this 15-year-old boy to the extent that it required this 15-year-old boy to go to All Children's Hospital for treatment. And once again, notice the emphasis on referring to him as a boy and as a child. And if the tables had been turned and this 15-year-old had committed a crime, then he would have been a young man, he would have been a teenager, and he would have been everything else. So always watch the narrative that's being played out to you. So it says, St. Pete police determined there was probable cause to arrest Harris on felony child abuse charges for allegedly beating the 15-year-old, and a warrant was issued. Because Harris was being sought for questioning in Scott's murder and wanted for attacking the 15-year-old boy, police made the decision on Wednesday to find and try to arrest him. And then also worth noting, somebody on Facebook, and it might have been the Marquise Scott's uncle, the young man that was killed last year, it might have been his uncle who said that he was going down this street in St. Pete called 22nd Street. And on 22nd Street, there's this restaurant and event space called the Manhattan. And so it's called the Manhattan Casino, although it was never a casino, but it is a major landmark, a historic landmark in Florida. And so he was going down 22nd and he noticed a large police presence in the parking lot of the Manhattan, and he knew that something was about to happen in the area. He just had no idea that this was what was about to happen. So according to Gutierrez, Harris' criminal record included charges of robbery, carjacking, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, burglary, throwing a deadly missile into an occupied dwelling, battery, grand theft auto, hit and run, reckless driving, criminal mischief, resisting arrest, and fleeing and eluding at a high speed. For about 2 years, Harris was monitored by Pinellas County's home program, which deals with prolific juvenile offenders. So detectives with the St. Pete Police Department Special Investigation Unit spotted Harris coming out of a home in St. Petersburg. Gutierrez said Harris reportedly left the house in a car with a friend of his, and investigators trailed them. So Harris and his friend parked about 4:15 p.m. outside the Food Max on 18th Avenue South near 14th Street. They got out of the car and walked inside. Gutierrez said a shopper told investigators that Harris had a gun concealed in his waistband at the time. So it doesn't tell us when he talked to the shopper, why the shopper would have felt the need to share this information. Not sure about that, because Florida is so not sure about that. So at some point, Harris and his friend walked back outside. Then the friend went into the store again while Harris sat in the car by himself. So I'm wondering if maybe the friend, because they did, if you watch the video of the shooting, There is a man that's crying in the video who was in the store, and he's saying, "That's my brother. They shot my brother." And so they arrested that young man after the shooting. So perhaps he told them after the fact that Harris did have a gun on his body at that time. So at some point, Harris and his friend walked back outside. Then the friend went into the store again while Harris sat in the car by himself. Or the friend might have been part of the setup. Maybe he was working with the police, and that's how they knew where they were. So detectives wanted confirmation of Harris's identity, so they called for uniformed patrol officers to check. The uniformed officers, one of whom was a K-9 officer, walked up to the car. According to Gutierrez, Harris rolled down his window and showed his identification to the two officers, who verified it was him. They asked him to step out of the car so they could arrest him and take him into custody, and he immediately rolled the window up on the car. As Harris was rolling up the window, Gutierrez said he was also reaching into the console area. Concerned he might be reaching for a gun, the sheriff's office said the police officers decided to break the car windows. Could he have been reaching for his car registration or something? Because if he had the gun in his waistband, like, do people take the gun out their waistband and put it into the console? Or would they have been sitting there? Like, I'm thinking this person probably still had the gun on him if he indeed had a gun. So investigators say Harris didn't exit the car and instead put it into reverse and plowed into a cruiser directly behind him. He then put the car in drive and crashed into a concrete pillar in front of the store. Gutierrez said Harris then hit another car in the parking lot and came to a rest facing north, just south of 18th Avenue South in the store's parking lot, according to law enforcement. At that point, the detective was able to pull his car directly in front of the car Harris was in. Another officer parked his unit just feet away from Harris. As that officer got out of his car to confront Harris, Gutierrez said Harris pointed a 9mm handgun out the window and shot the officer twice in the mid-torso from just a couple of feet away. The officer underwent surgery at the hospital Wednesday night and was in stable condition on Thursday. The officer was released from the hospital Thursday evening, and the police department expects the officer to make a full recovery. So obviously the officer was not that damn injured if he went home the next day after 2 gunshot wounds in the torso. So according to Gutierrez, Harris was trying to kill a cop. At that point, Harris was surrounded by police. 6 officers shot back. They fired at least 50 rounds and he was shot 38 times. The officers did exactly what they should have done and what they are trained to do, and that is to neutralize the threat and to keep shooting until the threat stops, so they don't get hurt and they can go home to their families and that they can remain safe, according to Gutierrez. Eventually, officers said Harris appeared unconscious, so they went in through the car's passenger side in an effort to pull him out. The gun was still in his hand at the time. Gutierrez said as officers were removing Harris from the car, investigators said the gun fell out of his hand and ended up on the floorboard. And then they shared a picture of the gun laying on the floor of the car. And according to Gutierrez, Harris had 5 rounds left in the seemingly extended aftermarket magazine that was found in the gun. There was 1 round in the chamber and 4 other casings have been recovered, according to law enforcement. Because the shooting involved the St. Petersburg Police Department, then they go into the whole story about this new task force that they created. And then they talk about the officers basically not identifying them, but, giving information about them. The undercover officer number 1, 36-year-old male detective with 14 years of service with the St. Pete Police Department. In 2007, he had an accidental discharge of firearm. Then in 2013, he was involved in a shootout with someone wanted for homicide. He killed the wanted man, and the shooting was ruled justified by the state attorney's office and by a command review board. Undercover number 2, 37-year-old male detective with 12 years of service in the St. Pete Police Department. He previously discharged his weapon to kill a vicious dog, which was ruled justified. Even dogs can't get justice in St. Pete, y'all. So, because I actually have a classmate who's a St. Pete police officer who was a canine cop, and his dog ended up dying. I can't remember if he left him in the car or if he was tethered outside, but I know the dog died, and he was like suspended and couldn't be on the K9 unit for a long time. So this guy was ruled justified for killing this dog that was attacking him, I guess. So Undercover 3, 29-year-old female officer with 2 years of service in the St. Pete Police Department. She had no prior shootings or disciplinary incidents. Undercover 4, 41-year-old male officer with 13 years of service in the St. Pete Police Department. He had no prior shootings or disciplinary incidents. Undercover 5, 49-year-old detective who has been with the St. Pete Police Department for 28 years. He discharged his firearm in 2003 and 2008. Both were during shootouts. The 2008 shooting was with a suspected robber. The state attorney's office and a command review board determined both shootings were justified. Police officer, patrol officer Richard McKee, 58, has 28 years of service as a police officer. He had one incident that resulted in a 5-day suspension for improper procedures that was related to check-on, check-off duty violation. He had an accidental discharge of a firearm in 2010. Nobody was hurt in that situation. And so once again, I said I'd be interested to find out if Richard McKee was black or white, because they was real anxious to release his name, even though they didn't want to release anybody else's name or the officer that was shot. And so the officers involved in the shooting have all been placed on paid administrative leave, which means they get like a 2-week vacation. In addition to the one officer who was shot and wounded, another officer was somehow injured, but not shot in the chaos, authorities said. So that is the latest that has been reported on this case. It seems to have just disappeared from the news cycle. You know, it's like, this is our story, deal with it. We're moving on. And then once again, like I said, once it came out that this young man was a suspect in the killing of the young man from last year, emotions started to change within the community. People they aren't really talking about it on Facebook that much. You know, the families, I guess, are well known in the community, and nobody wants to offend the other family. And so this will be one of those incidents that will just, you know, go by the wayside like so many other incidents. And I just wish that there was more emphasis on, you know, just exploring what is going on leading up to, you know, these shootings. Because like I mentioned earlier, this particular store has been the site of 3 deaths like in the past month or so, I believe it is. And so is the police trying to find out what's going on in the community? Like, is there turf wars? Is there drug wars that's leading up to all these shootings? And, you know, they did like a, you know, little mock press conference a couple of weeks ago, you know, where they bring out the pastors and the community leaders, you know, to say stop the violence. But we've been doing that, you know, for decades now, and that doesn't seem, you know, they'll do that and then you don't hear anything else from these so-called community leaders and pastors in the community. And so it's just, I only see it getting worse, you know, especially with the whole COVID situation. These kids are out of school. They have more time, more mischief to get into. You know, the schools are now reporting that, you know, there are students that have yet, like in the virtual areas. There are students that have yet to log into the portals, to log into Zoom classes, and they don't know where these kids are. And then it's like, where is the accountability amongst the parents to find out where your kids are and what your kids are doing? And then a couple of years ago, we had a whole series done on auto thefts in the community. That was a really, really bad situation that seems to have disappeared from the news. And then we had this documentary won a Pulitzer Prize, I think, yeah, Pulitzer Prize on the failing schools in the Black community of St. Pete. And then, as I said, the Black community of St. Pete is not that big. We have a lot of racial history. I actually earned my master's program documenting the area of the city where the Tampa Bay Devil Rays, or the Tampa Bay Rays, they changed their name, plays Major League Baseball. They like decimated an entire Black neighborhood to build that stadium there. And I did my master's program on all the churches that had been displaced as a result of that. And so now that the Rays are talking about leaving in 2027, they're already planning and doing RFPs to tear down the stadium. And now they want to build like a convention center and a hotel and a park. And they're not really involving the Black community into these discussions. And so it's like you just railroad over us, just run over us, do what you want. You're allowing gentrification. We need affordable housing. You keep letting private investors come in and buy up the little bit of land that's left in the community to build apartments and high-rises, charging astronomical rents. And so where I talked about the population earlier, I believe that the Black population is decreasing because people simply cannot afford to live in the city. And now they're moving out into the county areas and the smaller communities. And so just a lot to digest, a lot to get us to thinking about ways that we can be dealing with these issues. And I was really thinking about not even doing this video, but since I had stated in the previous video that I was going to talk about it more in depth, I went ahead and put the video together. So much more that I could talk about, but it would take hours and hours to say it all. But this was just a summary of it, plus what actually happened, or what the police are saying happened that led up to this shooting and how the shooting took place. And like I say, there are people who was actually on the scene that do not believe that even though this young man had a gun, that he actually fired the gun at police. They believe that the police officer, they shot the other police officer when they opened fire on the vehicle as he was, I guess, backing up and moving forward, trying to maneuver out of the parking lot, that's when the firing started, and that they actually shot their comrade. And so it would be interesting to see once these ballistics come out, if they will ever say that they actually shot that police officer and that this kid or this young man did not shoot that police officer. And now we will never know, you know, because he was not arrested or formally charged with the killing of the young man back in 2019. So, you know, there's speculation that he was the person that committed that murder, but now we will probably never know if he actually was the person that killed that young man, because he was never arrested. No evidence was presented. He never went to court, you know, for that murder or any involvement with that murder. So, like I say, it's died down. People aren't really talking about it that much. A few posts on Facebook, but this was the last story that came out, and this came out 2 days ago, and it's kind of like moved out of the news cycle. So go ahead, leave your comments below, rate the video, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And until the next time, I shall talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.